Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event, How We Fix the TIX, an update for APAP members on combating deceptive ticketing practices. I am Willie Santiago, the Manager of Programs and Resources for APAP. I use he, they pronouns, and I am a fair-skinned Hispanic person with brown eyes, medium-length wavy brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue beaded lace shawl. Before we begin today's event, I want to acknowledge that APAP is located in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway, Anacostan, and Pamunkey people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And I would like to pay my respect to the elders, both past, present, and future. Closed captioning will appear automatically on your screen. If you would like to disable the chat transcript, please click More on the bottom of the Zoom window and hide subtitle. Today, we are also joined by ASL interpreters from Purple, Isabella Olson and Bethany Blankenship. Thank you both for joining us for our event today. During today's event, you will have the opportunity for question and answer. We will ask that you please put your questions in the chat. The staff will be monitoring today's chat and will be collecting questions to be raised as a part of today's discussion later. APAP is your go-to resource for the tools you need as an arts worker in the field, and we offer programming year-round. We have a series of upcoming events that are around timely issues within the field. On May 31st, we have continuing our Thomas Dot Artist Mobility series that will be focused on long visas and agents as petitioners. On June 1st, we'll be presenting our update on the Arts Compensation Project. On June 7th, we'll have another installment of our Thomas Dot series on US and Canadian visas. And then lastly, we'll have our session on US and Canadian taxes. For more information on our upcoming program, you can go to apap365.org/programs. I will now turn things over to our facilitators, Krista Bradley, the Director of Programs and Resources, and Jenny Thomas, our Director of Marketing and Communications. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie. And we're recording, yes?
Yes, we are recording.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for being here. We're really excited to have you here. I just wanted to set a little bit of context and then hand it over to Jenny, my colleague. We spend a lot of our time in our individual and our collective work on programs and marketing and communications, but we work together on the advocacy front. And we're excited to be able to partner on this to share information with you. Today is really about being a roundtable discussion. It's not a briefing where we're just going to hear people and then you're not going to say anything because we really need everyone to participate in this. We want to provide you as colleagues with important background and give you some current updates on deceptive ticket practices and hear how this is impacting you, your venue, your artists, your patrons, your work. We will explore what we mean by deceptive ticketing practices, so we're all on the same page. We'll explore who's involved and who's impacted. How is this impacting the live performing arts industry, all of us being an ecosystem, whether we're agents, artists, venues, managers, and what's currently being done to counter these practices that negatively impact all of us. We'll also have a very good amount of time for Q&A. So as Willie said, please feel free to use the chat for your Q&A and we'll have your questions and we'll have a good amount for discussion. Jenny? Oh, you're on mute.
That would be helpful. Sorry.
We can hear you now.
No, I know. So we're really going to be talking about where the rubber hits the road here in terms of policy discussion. And that's why we have some colleagues here who are fantastic advocacy experts, truly. They have been doing the work and leading the work for, intensively for either in the last few years or ongoing. And so we're really going to talk about what has been happening, what the background is, who are the players, and and then we'll dive into what you can do to help move the work forward. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dana Frank, venue owner of the legendary First Avenue in Minneapolis, as well as the co-founder and board president of the National Independent Venue Association, also known as NIVA. And also welcoming Kevin Erickson, director of the Future of Music Coalition.
Yep. Great. Welcome, Dana. Welcome, Kevin. We're so glad to have you here. Before we kick things off, we want to get a better sense of who's in the room and what ticketing platforms you may be using. So before we get super started, I just want to ask Willie to put up this quick poll that we'll launch, just to get a sense of who's on Ticketmaster, who's on Audience View, who's using other ticketing platforms. So if you would take a minute and fill that out, that would be great. And then we'll get a chance to see who's in the room and what we're using here. Great. Okay, well, we're waiting for that. We'll show that poll in a minute. So let's get started and get on the same page, because I think people have been throwing out these terms like deceptive ticketing practicing, bots. What are we talking about? So I just wanted to pose this for our colleagues here with Dana and Kevin. What exactly are we talking about with deceptive ticketing practices? What do we mean by that? What does it entail? And I'm noticing a question in here that tessitura wasn't a choice, which it should have been. So we might have to reissue that just to double check. And if you do use tessitura and we don't reissue this, put it in the chat, please. So Dana and Kevin, how would you define what deceptive ticketing practices would be? What does that entail from your perspectives from Future Music Coalition and NIVA?
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jenny and Krista and Willie and APAP for hosting this. I think it's an incredibly timely and important topic. What we found from the independent venue promoter NIVA world is, I think everyone on here probably during the pandemic was freaking out, stressing out, trying to figure out how to make it through, working to save our stages. And as we were doing all of that, ticket brokers in the secondary market were perfecting their SEO, their SEM, their strategies on how to, turn a quick buck, I should say, on our tickets. And so coming out, upon reopening, trying to get through mandates, keeping folks healthy, masking, cancellations, Omicron, all of that kind of awoke in 2022 to realize that our customers didn't even know how to get fair market value or face value tickets. They didn't, they didn't know where they were buying from. They didn't know, what ticket purchases went to benefit the artists, what just kind of went out of the ecosystem. And so what we consider, we call it like predatory and deceptive, are practices by brokers, bots, resellers, secondary exchanges that intentionally obscure where folks are buying tickets and where that revenue is going towards. On top of kind of the overt deceptive practices, false URLs, everything from spec tickets, which is where a scalper will post a ticket for sale that they don't even own. And then if somebody usually it's for way obscene amounts of money. And if somebody just purchase it because they don't understand, then they'll go and they'll purchase it from, a different source. Everything when I don't know how many folks have Googled your venue or your artist and you see Vivid Seats, StubHub, Ticket Center that all come up first in the listings. Our customers don't know that they're not purchasing directly from artists and venues. So it kind of runs the gamut, but really it's been what we've noticing is a post-COVID explosion as folks were home and started day trading our tickets.
Thank you,
Kevin,
Dana.
what did I miss?
I mean, I will co-sign that, all of that. Okay, I should introduce myself. I'm Kevin Erickson. I'm a white male with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap and glasses. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm coming to you today from Silver Spring, Maryland. And I want to acknowledge this is unceded land cared for by Native tribes, including Piscataway peoples. So yeah, I would co-sign everything that you said, Dana, and I would say as well that like this term deceptive practices comes from consumer protection law. And so that historically has been the primary way that policymakers have looked at these issues as a consumer protection issue. And so part of our task as a field at this moment is about making sure and being assertive about claiming a place at the table for the full diversity of stakeholders, because we care so much about, our audiences are not just consumers, they are our community, they are fans, they are patrons, they are participants, and so we care deeply about them. At the same time, presenting organizations themselves are stakeholders, artists themselves are stakeholders, and the whole array of artists' team members that they work with are also stakeholders. And unfortunately, one of the ways that we got to this place in policy where so many of these bad practices in live event ticketing are running rampant and so much dysfunction exists in so many parts of the ticket market is because the issue has been defined in ways that exclude some of the most important stakeholders, including some of your organizations. That, the elected official who knows to call and talk to you when it's a conversation about arts funding, or when it's a conversation about arts and equity or arts and education, might not ever know to think that you are a stakeholder in ticketing policy. And this is a moment where the full diversity of voices is really needed in these conversations to define a way forward to solve all of these problems. Because otherwise there are very powerful commercial interests that that are very happy to define these issues in the ways that they would like to have them defined. And when that happens, we just double down on the existing dysfunction, and these are solvable problems, but only if we claim the place at that table.
Yeah, thank you for raising this up. Jenny, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, if we could hold that thought, Kevin, because we want to ask you about who exactly those people are and what's going on right now. I think we have the poll again to share, so I wanted to give Willie a chance to share the results for that. Willie, or I can click the share results. And then we'll get everybody back on screen.
Yeah, we've about 55 of 72 people here have filled it out. So if you haven't had a chance to refill the survey out, please do so.
Yeah, I think we've ended the poll actually.
All right.
But I'm going to hit share results.
Okay, cool.
And then we're going to get back to the screen and get back to Kevin and Dana. So while that's happening, let's talk a little bit about, okay, who are these players exactly? I know you both alluded to some of you may feel more inclined to name those players, because let's be honest, there are some big players. Let's talk about that, and let's talk about the abundance of bills that are out there and the kind of mass confusion that's happening, because we all know, Biden mentioned something in his, State of the Union. There have been other times that other bills have been introduced as recently as last week. And those are not the things that right now we are building a coalition behind, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But Dana, Kevin, can you tell us a little bit more? Can we dig into what's going on right now and who the players are?
Sure. I mean, I think one place to start is obviously Ticketmaster is huge, is the largest company in live events. And in 2010, Ticketmaster merged with Live Nation, which is the largest promoter of live events, in a controversial merger that faced a lot of opposition at the time, and now is facing a lot of calls to the Department of Justice to unwind that merger. And, including from members of the arts community, including my organization, Future of Music, is among the organizations that have called for Ticketmaster Live Nation to be broken up, because it control like 70% of the market and are engaging in a range of questionable practices. At the same time, we also recognize that Ticketmaster is not the only potentially bad actor in this space, and that there are a number of companies that, if you divide the ticketing marketplace into primary and secondary companies, the primary ticketing company is the company that you partner with to do the ticketing for your event. And then the secondary companies are either individual brokers who buy up tickets and resell them, or resale sites like StubHub, like SeatGeek, like Vivid Seats, that offer a platform for the commercial resale of those event tickets. Those secondary companies have been using the broad and widespread frustration that consumers have with Ticketmaster to try and advance their own policy agenda. And because those companies, those resellers, are themselves responsible for much of the dysfunction and much of the deceptive and predatory practices in the ticketing space, we feel a special responsibility to be very clear that, yes, let's deal with Ticketmaster. There are ways, potentially legislatively, but also through other kinds of government action, to address the problems that follow from that merger. But we also need some sensible rules of the road that apply to all companies in this space, that protect patrons, protect presenters against the worst practices, and restore a sense of control to the artists, to the presenters, to the venues. Like, in terms of like the challenges we're seeing, like certainly the entire business model of the secondary companies is to try and access as much of the ticket inventory as possible, and to oppose any kind of regulatory or legislative moves that restrict their access to that inventory, because they want to be able to get as many tickets as they can before actual patrons, and then resell those tickets for as much as they can possibly charge. Effectively, what they want to be able to do is funnel as much revenue away from artists and presenters and venues and promoters, away from anybody who actually had anything to do with putting on a successful event, and funnel that money to their investors. And so it's fundamentally an extractive business model. Actually, I'll just stop there. Dana, do you have anything more to say about that?
No, that was incredible. I think what we've been finding is that traditionally, any conversation about ticketing really focuses on Ticketmaster versus resellers, like the National Association of Ticket Brokers, primarily, in their kind of offshoot organizations that they've founded, like Fan Freedom, and they always have the words like freedom and ticket buyer in them. But traditionally, it's been kind of those two going head to head. And so we're really excited to have, as NIVA, the National Independent Venue Association, and NITO, the National Independent Talent Organization, and Kevin and Future Music, and APAP, and we're excited to have broader stakeholders at the table in the conversation about ticketing, and to kind of insert, not a Ticketmaster perspective and not a scalper perspective.
Yeah, and this coalition is so important because we are the stakeholders that take on most of the risk for all of it, right? Whether you're the artist, the agent, the manager, or the venue. So how do we protect all of us in that effort? I really appreciate hearing about the players. I know that this isn't the first time that we've talked about these issues, though. So I just wonder, before we talk about fix the ticks and sort of what's ahead and what we're looking at, like, are there some things that we need to know as an industry about what's happened heretofore? I know that some states have taken on some ticket legislation. We've heard about the BOSS Act, and I don't even know if we know what that is. Just what do we need to know about what's already happened to make sure that we're well positioned moving forward? And are there any arguments that are being raised up among the other folks that you mentioned that we need to be aware of to help craft our message in a way that is the most effective?
So one piece of legislation that did pass and become law in the past was called the BOTS Act, which was targeting basically robots that buy up tickets on behalf of secondary sellers. And it's unfortunately, it has potentially a deterrent effect, but it's only been used to actually charge people with a crime one time, as far as we know. And so there's some challenges associated with enforcement. At the state level, there are a flurry of new bills that have come up in the state legislatures this year. A handful of good bills, but overwhelmingly bills that are driven by the secondary sellers, and sometimes quite deceptively. Like they'll be named something like the SWIFT Act or the Eras Act after the Eras tour, trying to take advantage of the Taylor Swift situation and the new policymaker interest in ticketing, but ultimately advancing a very narrow agenda that isn't aligned with most of the stakeholders in the space. And so there's been some quick mobilization to try and push back on that at the state level. And these fights are still ongoing, I think, in Texas, Louisiana, California, I think New Jersey. They're popping up all over the place, again, because some of these commercial players have virtually unlimited resources. So it's important to, at the state level, make sure that whatever is happening at the state level, the policymakers that are in dialogue with you and understand that you have a point of view on these issues as well. And then previous legislative attempts here, we saw a bill in 2019 or 2020 called the BOSS Act, named after Bruce Springsteen. And unfortunately, while it contained a couple of potentially helpful provisions, overwhelmingly it was again characterized by the inclusion of just a bunch of giveaways to the secondary sellers. And it did it in a slightly deceptive way, and that in ways that to a casual observer of the industry might look more innocent or potentially even helpful. For example, one of the things that the BOSS Act includes was provisions around what's called holdback transparency. So holdbacks is the industry term for any tickets that are not put on sale as part of the general on sale to a general market. In the live concert marketplace, there's a whole host of reasons for this. There's fan clubs, there's partnerships with credit card companies or cell phone companies, and the secondary sellers don't like this because that ultimately restricts their access to inventory, but it ends up being very important for the artist's ability to put on the show in the way that they intend, and having to disclose those numbers, disclose the inventory in that way is again just sort of making it as easy as possible for these predatory secondary sellers to calculate and calibrate their buying up of these tickets. But for nonprofit arts presenters outside of the live music, pop music marketplace, things that get classified as holdbacks could be an even more broad and diverse array of normal day-to-day ticketing practices, because the kinds of things like season tickets, things like educational discounts, there's a whole bunch of complex and evolving and, changing the pricing over time, because you're opening up the second balcony, when you realize that there's going to be more demand than you initially anticipated. Like there's a need for flexibility and diversity of practice in the nonprofit arts field that a piece of legislation like the BOSS Act just really isn't able to account for. So we're expecting that there may be attempts to reintroduce that legislation, and if that happens, I think it would be a good moment for this community to sort of assert ourselves collectively.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's interesting to hear how the different terms translate across our industry, whether it's live performance or dynamic pricing or donor holdbacks for the people that are help us do our work in the Performing Arts Center world. So thank you for that. I am wondering if this is the time to talk a little bit about Fix the TIX, or if it's also an opportunity for folks to just start putting questions in the chat that we can start talking about, because we do want to hear some of your horror stories. I think that there have been some horror stories that we have heard from our colleagues about, particularly those of you that are working at front of house, and what that means for you in terms of your patrons, or patrons that you'd like to be your patrons but are so upset with you because your ticket doesn't matter. So we want to hear about that. But maybe this is a good time to just kind of introduce why we have a coalition. Jenny, do you want to lead us into that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you just suggested, but if people want to start dropping in some things, then we'll just kind of watch that, as well as your questions. Questions and horror stories, go ahead and drop them into the chat, and we'll start building that. Hopefully it's not too scary, but in any case, yeah, so Fix the TIX, you've heard about this because obviously this was part of the name of the webinar today, the briefing. And so we want to talk a little bit more about that. I think Dana is the most appropriate person to introduce what Fix the TIX is and where we are in the scheme of things.
Yeah, thanks. So Fix the TIX, the concept behind it was to try to gather folks who actually put on shows, who take the risks on events and have the responsibility of executing on those events for concert goers. So promoters, producers, venues, artists, artist representatives, organizations, associations, etc., like all in the world of really nurturing and fostering that fan artist relationship, because that's how we see a ticket, right? Not as like the end product, but really as the start of a relationship between an artist and their fans, and who would be kind of on the same page and have the same goals and priorities in protecting those relationships. And so we have, I think, almost or more than 24 members at this point. I have been trying to scroll through attendees. Thank you to everybody on this call who's joined up. But, the goal is, again, being, kind of going back to those earlier conversations of inserting a voice into the conversation that is not Ticketmaster and that's not the secondary market, but, the ones at the door, seeing the fake tickets on, I don't know you guys, but like on a nightly basis at this point, dealing with fans who are devastated, who overpaid, and really feeling the impact in our communities from fans who are angry, who take it out on us because they got duped, etc. And so, some of the top priorities are, fighting these predatory and deceptive practices so that we can make sure that our fans know where they can go to get tickets at face value that benefit artists in the ecosystem, to try to strengthen the BOTS Act and stop the, already illegal, but make that illegal activity like enforceable, or help the government enforce that. And also protect the ability for artists, promoters, producers to enact their contract rights on the tickets as they transfer hands on the secondary market. So basically, if you have an artist or if you have a show that says, okay, we only want face value transfer, that wish, which is a contract, terms and condition on the ticket contract can be enforceable. Also, banning spec tickets and helping get some data from the secondary market so that we know who's in our rooms at all time in case of emergency or in case of, as we started seeing during COVID, canceled, moved shows, delayed shows, etc. So really bringing, again, trying to gain some control and oversight of our customers who are, purchasing off our platforms so that we can help execute better on the shows.
So what I'm hearing, is, getting control, putting the control back in the hands of the people taking risks, the venues, the presenters, the artists, strengthening those relationships, letting those folks all be in charge of the terms and conditions of the ticketing, increasing transparency of those who are pretending to be the venues, and sort of siphoning revenues away from the risk takers. Is that a good summary, Kevin? Do you also have anything you want to add to?
Yeah,
to
I mean,
what's
the
going on?
comments that are coming on are super enlightening in that, we knew about some of this happening in the concert venue space, but in the arts presenter space, it seems like that there's some of these problems are even maybe more acute in the prevalence of sites that are specifically deceiving people into thinking that tickets are sold out when they're not sold out, and sometimes haven't even gone on sale yet. And when that happens, there's a potential not just for lost revenue for that ticket holder, but other potential patrons as well are getting driven away. And the big challenge with all of this is that for years they would have on the Hill, they would have policy debates around these issues, and there wouldn't be a representative artist of venues or anybody in representing arts presenters in any of these panels. And so there's some real catching up that has to happen with policymakers. I got a bunch of puppets. Is this a good time for me to show the puppets?
I think it would be.
Yeah.
So I'm in the early stages of getting ready to do this, but I found, both for the sake of having memorable presentations among the dozens of advocacy people that a particular staffer might talk to over the course of the day, you try to make it memorable, but also because this is a complex field, and people say, can you explain it to me like I'm 5? And so I just got puppets. So here we have, I guess her name is Felicia the fan, and you can see her pom-poms. She's a real fan. And, what did we name Ronnie the reseller? He's a ticket reseller. You can see from a distance they kind of look a lot alike. As it turns out, though, they don't really have many interests in common. And so when you hear advocacy organizations that are funded by the secondary ticketing companies talking about ticket buyers' rights, it's really important to ask yourself the question, which kind of ticket buyer are they talking about? Are they talking about policies that are best for Felicia the fan here, or are they talking about what's best for Ronnie the reseller? Because those can be very, very different outcomes based on who you're prioritizing. So for example, a lot of folks focus on, well, what if the fan gets stuck with a ticket that they can't use? And what if Felicia has to cancel or can't get a babysitter or something? And so they focus on her ability to commercially resell that ticket as the thing that if we don't let her do that, we're actually taking the rights away. And more, and I think that some of your organizations are looking into this as well, whether it's through a fan-to-fan face value marketplace, there are some solutions that have come up with to help deal with these that narrow problem in a elegant way. And so some of the ticketing providers are starting to build that kind of technology into their platform. So if you get a sold out event and somebody needs to exchange that ticket or get that ticket to another fan or transfer that ticket to somebody else, there's a way to do that doesn't just incentivize Ronnie over here to be able to use his army of robots to buy up all the tickets and extract as much value as possible. And okay, that's enough of the puppets for now. The point is, I guess that like, that's the critical question that we need to be asking in these policy discussions about the difference between when people talk about ticket buyers' rights, make sure that we're talking about ticket buyers who are actually part of the community, that actually buy a ticket because they want to go to the event and focus the outcomes there.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about ticket buyers, we often, I know in our conversations, we hear people talk about consumer groups. So they're using the term consumer groups as a way to talk about Felicia, but maybe they're not talking about Felicia, they're talking about Ronnie. Just to like underscore. I also wanted to underscore one other point that Dana, you were making, and Jenny, you were amplifying. I mean, this is all those things about putting the control back into the people who are the stakeholders, but I think also there are reputations at stake. I'm just looking at the chat. There are reputations at stake, and protecting your role and your access as an arts organization. I know performing arts organizations are wanting to make sure that people look at them as affordable or accessible. And so when other people step into their light and basically say, no, it's not really a $15 ticket, but it's an $85 ticket, that just underscores the inaccessibility of the arts that, some people are trying to counter. And then also, I've heard stories about patrons and donors just being really upset with the organizations, like, why aren't you protecting us against this? So it just puts reputations at stake too, and at a time that's ever so precarious anyway, as we're all trying to come back out of COVID and market our shows and get more patrons in the door. It's challenging. So it sounds like this is not, for all the reasons that you said, and for all the sort of long-term sustainability issues for performing arts organizations, this is an important issue that we need to be, I know we care about this, but like, how do we kind of use our voices in a way that can really get us in the right rooms?
I just wanted to give a thank you to Wendy for posting in the chat. I had not seen before when the resellers were advertising on your Google Maps link. And I think it would be super helpful if we can get a copy of this chat. I think that, sorry, I'm trying to keep up, like the horror stories, like they're ever present, right? But the fact that they're literally advertising on your Google Maps page is something else entirely.
These are just exactly the kinds of stories that policymakers need to be hearing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the chargebacks, I see there's a lot of comments and chargebacks on the chat. If that's something that I think we're seeing across the board, and if there are good solutions to that for, that are more than just like fighting it, I think that might be a helpful conversation point too, because that is certainly seems to, again, we've always, at least at First Avenue, like we always had a problems with chargeback, but nothing close to like what it is in 2023.
For those people that don't know what chargebacks are, can you confirm and clarify?
It's when people challenge the charge on their credit card, usually after the show, they say like the card was stolen or they didn't actually authorize the charge. And usually, Visa, MasterCard will just put the customer first, and then the venue or promoter has to eat it, right? But we've already paid the bands, we've already paid out the show. And so it's literally like it would be equivalent in retail to like a shoplifting charge, or shoplifters,
Thank you. So there's lots of activity in the chat. I want to lift up some questions here, and then I also, one of the things that we wanted to do was hear how you're navigating it, because until there are policies in place, there are creative ways that I think some of you are addressing some of these issues. So just want to lift those up. But there is a question here from, I thought I saw Aaron's name here. Do you advise the end buyer from secondary to do a chargeback to the broker, then sell them another seat in the hall? Was that to the panel or just to somebody else?
That was basically to the chat. That's something that we used to do if we noticed someone was improperly reselling tickets, we would cancel their account, find any accounts that had the same addresses, same emails, anything that was related, send them an email saying their accounts were going to be canceled. If they did a fraudulent chargeback, we would send them a notification that all your future shows would be canceled. And if someone showed up and said they bought from another site and their ticket was not valid, we would then suggest a chargeback, and then we would see what inventory we did have available. Depending on the situation, sometimes we'd sell them at a discount just because we wanted them to feel better about themselves, because you frequently would feel like they would feel like they had done something wrong or bad. And we don't want people who come to venues to feel that they've done something wrong or bad just because they were uneducated on how to purchase a valid ticket.
Thank you, Erin. That's a really practical set of a lot of practical ways to sort of mitigate that. You always have practical solutions from the ticket thing. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of other horror stories, John Custonia just put in the chat something that we've heard a lot of times, where people have created these websites that look so similar to your own website. And in fact, I think one of our members, a presenter who runs a presenting organization, and got almost duped herself because it looked so legit. That's a very common thing. I wonder, are other people dealing with that, and have they found ways to sort of sideline or counter the whole website dupe program problem? Anybody?
A question I have, in case there is not a response to that, would be back to Dana and Kevin about the legislation, the Fix the TIX legislation, and what will that do to that kind of scenario? What kind of regulations would be in place to prevent that kind of deception?
Well, yeah. So, go ahead, Kevin.
I mean, it seems like it's squarely aimed at exactly that kind of situation. It would, Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we're talking about is identifying situations like that explicitly in statute as a deceptive practice, and empowering the FTC to go after the people that participate in those kinds of practices with meaningful fines to the tune of $15,000 per violation.
Yeah, so some practices that would be outlawed or illegal would be like the deceptive websites, using any kind of IP, venue, or artist name in URLs, using branding, like your venue or promoter's logo, or even a picture, and very much spelled out, like anything that is intending to deceive. So what resellers could do is they could provide factual information about name, date, venue, address, but nothing that would be intentionally misleading into trying to convince the fan, that it might be an authentic website. Also couldn't use any IP in SEO or marketing or advertising. So, we're not a Ticketmaster client, and we battle Live Nation every day. And so, even having Ticketmaster advertise to me my shows, I was like, that's something else, because of course they have the resale, they're the biggest reseller. So it would also completely outlaw spec tickets. So a reseller would have to have the ticket or the rights to purchase the ticket and certify that before posting a listing. Right now you can post a listing for anything you want. And then the problem is that if you can't come up with that ticket, then they just give the folks a refund. But oftentimes the refund doesn't come until after they've spent money on airfare and hotels, and they've showed up at the door and they're angry. And so what we've spent a lot of time trying to convince legislators is like, and that's why these stories are so incredible, is like, fans don't want a refund. They want to go to the show. And especially if you're a seated theater, you might not have a ticket to sell them, and we can't go over fire capacity. And so like it doesn't satisfy anyone to get a refund when they really want a ticket. So those are some of the things we're working on. Also, all-in pricing. So a fan or a concert goer would see the total price that the ticket will cost them with fees and charges broken out. And then the data, so that venue and artists get the name and email address, contact info, and also the purchase price of the tickets. And we get the name of buyers and sellers, so that we have the information of people coming to the show. So if a show moves, we can contact them. Otherwise, I don't know how many people show up day of angry at us because we didn't tell them the show moved. But also so that we know who sold the ticket, so that we can help fight the chargeback issue, and have some kind of proof that tickets were sold. And then also the transaction history, so that we can help enforce the bill.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I think Erin had her hand up, and then I think Jenny had a comment she wants to raise up.
Yes, somebody had private messaged me and mentioned the fact that Google about 4 years ago came up with a rule that they announced in a presentation, that if you were not the venue and you were trying to sell tickets, they were requiring that they put a notification saying, we are not the primary seller of this ticket. This tickets may be above the original rate, and some statements of that, or they would be removed. And many did add that, though it's very small and it's not a law, but you know, Google has a decent amount of power. But somebody had asked about that, so I thought I might mention it. It might not be bad to kind of see what Google has done and see what has worked to help with the legislation. I was also curious about the fees, seeing as APAP works with both presenters, venues, and performers. One of the things with fees that I experienced in the past is because of the percentage the artist would take, or the artist promoters would remove. That's why the venues would have fees above and beyond that wasn't within the ticket. And it seems like some of that negotiation would need to change if we were marketing all-inclusive price that includes the fee price. And how do the artists feel about that?
Those are good points to raise up. You know, I know that the policies that we're advocating for are much more transparent about all those fees. So Dana, Kevin, thoughts about that shift and how that might be playing out for different stakeholders?
Sure. I mean, one place where I think that the artist community and the venue community have come together around this is a level of shared comfort with all-in pricing, as long as the math is shown. So the consumer gets to see both the total price, but also the what's called the face value, and then the fees. So they get to see everything, and they, you know, usually there's an understanding that the face price before the fees is the only part of the ticket price that the artist has any ability to negotiate for any piece of that. So there's a level of transparency around that. And so as long as that math is displayed, I think that the artist community is really comfortable with that. And it has, you know, positive impacts for consumers and for competition as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Kevin, Dana, you can add.
Co-signed. I'm like mesmerized by all the comments in the chat. It's so, I think, supremely helpful to read everyone's experiences and again here on the ground.
Yeah, thanks.
On the Google question, I have a little unfortunate developments there, which is that you know, I would say that Google, while we give them a pat on the back for doing the right thing and requiring some level of disclosure of those sites, and exercising a little bit of leverage there. Unfortunately, like there's also some grounds to question their motivation in that, like I think in requiring that they're taking some of the heat off of themselves in this space, because, you know, they are profiting immensely for the advertising sales that are being placed by StubHub and all the other broker sites. And so Google, unfortunately, is also one of the chief funders of NetChoice, which is one of the consumer groups that have been on the other side of these issues. While, however, I think that looking at like some of the things that they've been able to do successfully through private marketplace negotiation.
No, it started at 3. It's probably almost over here.
I think somebody
Well,
doesn't
there's
have their
200 and
mute
some
on.
people on here. I haven't.
So we can still work to sort of replicate the good things about that have worked and enhanced and more meaningful and clear language around disclosure is one of the things that we'd like to see in the legislative approach.
Thanks. Yes, we will share this recording and chat. I encourage you to put more stories, but I think we also need to find ways to capture. We have a good chunk of them, and we'll figure out other ways to codify them so that we can share those. Personal stories are also great because, you know, they're your own. And then Jenny, did you want to raise anything?
No, I mean, continue to drop things into the chat. We will very likely be reaching out to you at different points because we're really looking at now what's next in the process. And I know that there are certain things we can share and certain things we're not quite ready to share, but I know that there's going to be a fair amount of advocacy in the coming months. And I was curious with Dana and Kevin, what you wanted to share on that front.
Yeah, I'm gonna post a link in the chat of where you can share your horror stories. It's the Fix the TIX. The website is not live yet, so don't post it publicly anywhere, but it is a good kind of like receptacle for your box office managers. And again, as much as you can send in, I think it's just really helpful in helping us tell this story to legislators in a way that's not Ticketmaster and not brokers. And like, this is exactly what they need to hear again. And because we are the people that take all of the risk and have all the responsibility for the events. And so it's time that we start inserting ourselves into this conversation.
Great. Yeah.
And
Thank you, Dana.
And we want to mention as well, in case you missed the message coming from APAP, that APAP will be participating in a Hill Day that is actually part of the NIVA conference. NIVA is coming to Washington, D.C., and I know not everybody knows that we at APAP are mostly based in Washington, D.C. So we're joining up with NIVA to support their Hill Day and to gather APAP members to join us on July 12th, but also to join us at the conference July 10th through 12th. Our CEO and President Lisa Richards-Toney is going to be leading some conversations during the programmatic part of the conference, but just mark your calendars, especially if you're near DC, or if that might be a convenient trip for you this summer to join us in the sweltering heat and heat things up on Capitol Hill. So that's the plug. And NIVA was great to give us their NIVA member price as well. So take a look at your latest spotlights.
And maybe we can put that in the chat as well, if there's any kind of link that we can put in. So we're almost out of time. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to do a hearty thanks to Dana and Kevin for sharing their time and their expertise and their experience with us and to facilitate this conversation. And Jenny, thank you for being my partner, colleague in doing this. And thank you all for raising up so many stories and for continuing to support each other. You know, we are an ecosystem, and we have a lot of peer problem solving that happens in whether it's this forum or our affinity group. So thanks for being so forthright in how you're navigating the effort. We'll look to continue to find ways to lift those up so that you all have access to that. And we'll share the chat and share the stories, and we'll keep in touch. But I think this was great. I hope that you found it useful. We hope that you found it useful. I think we might have a survey link to put in, or maybe we'll send that out to you later. But if there are no other questions, I think that's peace out, and we'll put some music on and we'll send that out. Thank you again, Dana and Kevin and Puppets, for being here.